This is the Erasing Shame Podcast, Season 5, Episode 2. Co-hosts react to the Capitol Hill events in Washington, D.C. This is a continuation of Episode 1. After we introduced our backstories, we also wanted to check in with each other about the crazy, unprecedented events in Washington, D.C. during the month of January. Let's join the conversation in progress. We have a lot to talk about. We've got a whole year to do it, and we'll weave that in with how shame affects all kinds of aspects of our lives. So one of the topics that we want to address, because it's timely and shame affects us in real time, that a lot has happened in this month of January with a change in the presidential administration, with the insurrection at Capitol Hill, with the start of 2021. And it would be timely to spend some time talking about that, to acknowledge it and to kind of set up, hey, in the next episode, we'll drill down a bit more because these are developing situations. And we want to be timely in our conversation. So how did it strike you? I'll start with Leah because this might be the most poignant, to have the first vice president who's female, Indian, and
half Jamaican.
Yeah, just being such a pioneer is now part of the American history and the fabric.
It's amazing. Wow. It's funny because I think I told you guys this last time. It's like raised the bar for Indian kids for sure. Like, it's. I was struggling with this a little bit, and then I saw a TikTok with someone explaining why I was struggling with this. Because it is huge, and it's a huge thing to have a woman be in that position. But I realized today that I've already seen women in powerful positions. Like, we've had female prime ministers in India before, like before I was born, and a lot of, and so it's, to me, part of it's frustrating because I'm like, why did it take us this long to get here? For this country to get here, it made no sense that it took so long. So there's a part of frustration, but also I love that it's going to be normal for little kids growing up to see women in these positions and brown women in these positions. And she's not what you'd call a soft person. Like, she's not warm and cuddly. Like she's hard. She goes after you if she, right? And so I want to see those people in power, and to there's a part that feels healing and there's a part that feels frustrating because I'm like, why did it take so long? Why just, yeah. So it's both and for me.
The frustration's over now. You can breathe a sigh of relief and, and create a new future together. And I was surprised at your first reaction that it was, boy, the bar's been set high. That's such an Asian reaction. It's like when people achieve, you have to out-achieve them. I'm like, oh, come on. I don't need that kind of pressure.
Yeah, but I think I'd like to see it on a presidential level. Like, I don't want to settle, like, just like, we have a female vice president and a brown female vice president. Like, it's, I want it to see the presidential level, but yeah, I don't want to settle either, because I think there's a tendency for people to be like, oh, okay, that box is ticked, we've done it once. But how do we make this? I just want to.
How do we normalize it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Make it an expectation. Well, I don't know. Expectations are hard to fight, but not necessarily an expectation, but make it something that can be expected, right? Not should be, but can be.
Right.
Yeah.
What was it like for you guys to see that and see the inauguration and the way that was all held?
I think the moments that really touched me were watching Justice Sonia Sotomayor. So, a brown woman to another brown woman. That was, yeah, so emotional for me. Um, and I really, actually, it was like ministered to my heart to see the way Kamala Harris's husband was really in kind of a serving, supporting role. That's just always so beautiful. Because growing up in like Christian, conservative, very Asian, environments, the gender roles are so traditional, right? So it's usually like the woman holding the thing for the man and the man leading and speaking. But they flipped the script. And the fact that he was like a white male too, that was just healing for me. It was really beautiful to watch him honor her and how they support one another. And then, come on, we got to talk about the young poet laureate. Amanda Gorman. She's like the next Malala or Greta. I mean, just so amazing. That I think actually was the most poignant part for me. To see that she was, to me, the most articulate one that spoke the most powerfully in the whole thing. Yeah, that was really moving. And I got to process it with a client of mine who's like this, junior high school girl. And I was like, what was that like for you to see a woman of color or a young lady of color speak so powerfully and maybe more articulated than every other adult there, right? Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I was just, I'm not very politically active. I do vote, but I don't get worked up in terms of like following the news and understanding political science. But I was just very grateful it was a peaceful transition.
Yes.
Because our nation spent so much resource to protect it. 25,000 troops in Washington and just bracing ourselves for the worst because of that insurrection, which is still a horrible incident in our history and our time. Yeah. And then I see some news about how the National Guards didn't have a place to go after the inauguration. They were just put in the garages. I was like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened there, who dropped the ball, but a very emotional time. I was drained by the end of the day. I could definitely feel the significance and the weight of what we just experienced as a nation, and I'm grateful to breathe a sigh of relief because the past 4 years were so contentious and stressful, and really brought out the ugliest side of our country.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping things will look better.
Yeah. I think I'm on the same page as Hannah, and kind of just seeing the first second gentleman in history, in the history of U.S. history, and I think it's so it's just a different feel now, right? There's this change in how we can see leadership, and I think because we come from a very male dominant culture, and what we've seen in leadership has always been men first, like even saying the second gentleman, like that just has new meaning to it for, I think, everyone, right? There's a space in which we now can recognize and see that, like, there are strong women out there who lead, and men can support their wives, husbands can support their wives in leading and being the leaders that they are. And there's no, like, he's not throwing a fit, he's not, I'm sure he gets made fun of, right, by his peers and whatnot, because that's such a odd term for our society to accept. But I think there is a lot of just encouragement to see, as a woman steps into leadership, her husband can support her well and care for her well in that space. So
Yeah. I kind of wanted to piggyback off the comment about the Capitol riots, and I that was really emotional for me. I don't know for Leah and George. I was surprised by how emotional I was because I guess the only other like huge national, you know, dangerous situation that I remember is 9/11. So it's like 9/11 and then Capitol riots where it's like America's in trouble. um, and when 9/11 happened, I was about to go to college. It was literally 2 weeks before I started undergrad. And I remember looking at the TV and it was like watching a movie scene and I was in complete shock and denial. And there was another side of me that was like, this is humiliating, right? You know, like, how could this be happening to America? Because I had that America the Great, you know, kind of in my head. And I was brought up that way. But on the other hand, I also felt like, well, we kind of had it coming. I don't know how I knew that or felt that at 18, but I did. And then with the riots, it was such a different feeling where I think because I've been voting for, you know, half my life now, um, I felt much more ownership, right, as an American than I did maybe at 18. And I was like, I'm a part of this country. Like these people screaming at the Capitol Police, like I felt that, and the videos made me weep. Um, it might be related to me having family members who like possibly could have been present at the protest. Maybe not walked into the Capitol, but they might have been in the outside, you know, like
Wow.
kind of thing. And so that sense of anger and division, and people's like lack of honoring, I think, the things that our country's supposed to stand for, that really hurt personally. And it was very shameful to then kind of hear the news about how other countries are responding. And strangely, I felt really American. Like, and I started praying actually for our country, which I don't do a whole lot. But I was like, I actually feel like really led to pray for unity and peace and healing. Yeah, that was a new experience for me actually. And so, and I see that the Biden administration is going to have so much trouble ahead picking up the pieces, right? So that was an interesting experience for me to feel so identified with what was happening and feeling like it was happening in my own family, which I was like, when did I love America this much? I guess I do. Yeah, so it was really interesting to explore and be self-aware of all the different feelings I was feeling. Yeah.
I remember because I was in the middle of work when my boss texted me and like, do you know what's happening? And I was like, looked at my phone, scanned everything, and I was like, yeah, well, I just sort of went like, well, that's expected. That's just whatever. Like, I'm not even surprised. And then I saw the photo of that one guy flying the Confederate flag in the Capitol, and that's when I think something broke inside of me. I have a really hard time with the Confederate flag. Like growing up, well, when I first moved back to the US, like Pacific Northwest is just this beautiful bubble that just protects itself from the rest of the country. And so I remember when 2016 elections happened, I was like, how the heck did this happen? Like, and then I moved to the South and I was like, oh yeah, now this makes sense. The culture here, it's hard because you see Confederate flags everywhere as if it's just normal merch that you sell. Like there is a booth in the mall that sells Confederate merch. People have it on their trucks. They wear t-shirts and just go into regular restaurants. And it's baffling to me. And I've had people say, well, not all people who don the Confederate flags are racist. It's just for them what it means and what it represents is legacy and preservation of history. And then the education system in the South still teaches that the Civil War happened as an economic states' right issue or not. And so like there's systemically that just it's such a different fabric from the Pacific Northwest. And so I remember when my partner and I were talking about getting married, I was really resistant. He's originally from Portland. He moved to Virginia for a job, and so it was going to be that I'd have to move because I just had more professional flexibility, and I did not want to talk to him about it, not because I didn't want to get married, but I didn't want to move to the South. And Charlottesville had happened when we started to have those conversations. And I was like, this is like less than 2 hours from where you live. Like, you're telling me that there are white men running around saying, like, it was as hard, could not bridge those two things together. And so when the riots happened and I saw that Confederate flag flown in this place where the lawmakers are supposed, anyway, it was just like, I was so pissed off. I like completely just decimated an Amazon box that I had. And so I think it was interesting going from that and then watching the inauguration where we did have a brown woman be the first, like be vice president and be sworn in by Justice Sotomayor, and having Amanda Gorman's, like, it was really interesting to like experience such emotions on like both ends of the spectrum within a matter of a week or two. But to know that both still exist, right? Like, just because the inauguration's over, I'm like, these riots are still going to happen. Like, I'm still going to have to confront people donning the Confederate flag, and what do I do with that? How do I live in the same neighborhood and community as those people? And so riots are very triggering for me too.
Well, now that you mentioned that, I actually grew up in Virginia, so I went to high school and college there.
Nova or Southern?
Well, I went to Virginia Tech for college, so I'm a Hokie. But grew up in Winchester, which is a small town of 20,000, an hour west of D.C. So it's not exactly Northern Virginia, which has become its own entity because it's suburban and very high tech. And yeah, because I think the growing up years was just keeping our head down and not cause trouble because we were in that white environment was the way we survived. So it was very much survival. And then before I moved out here to California in 2007, I lived 10 years in Maryland. So I've been on those Capitol steps, and I'm very familiar with living and being around DC, and to see that happen. I think all I could get to was shock. I couldn't believe this was happening with the insurrection. You know, I'm not talking about the protests outside. I'm talking about the insurrection where people broke in to the Capitol and killed several people and caused so much damage. And it had to raise the question for me, is like, I mean, the police could have and should have handled that. They should have not had that much access to destroy that much. I mean, what was going on? I mean, was that a race thing or more?
Right.
And that part made no sense to me. And that's an outrage on our government and our police force and security. Something definitely went awry there.
Yeah, I think I was in the middle of sessions, and so I had no clue what was going on until came out of a session for a lunch break, and my wife goes, they're like rioting at the Capitol. I'm like, who's rioting at the Capitol? And we turned on the news, and man, it was just a crazy sight to see, because like this whole 2020 and this, you know, experience of, you know, marching for Black lives and protesting against police brutality, and, you know, just all of the hate and shame that was being thrown out on these peaceful protests that ended up being, you know, taken over by, you know, individuals who decided to riot, right? And the judgment that was being tossed out, like to see those people who were throwing that same judgment out on these Black Lives Matters protests, now taking up those actions and saying, but we're right in doing this, we're okay in doing this. I think that's what hit the hardest, was how do I wrestle with this frustration of their hypocrisy, right? Without throwing shame back into the mix, right? And I think that's the place where it's like, man, so many Facebook posts or so many tweets could go out right now, and just like talking about, you know, the hypocrisy and all this, and shaming them for what they're doing. And you know, I think I saw, at least in my circles and in the world, like there was enough of that shame throwing that was happening, that I didn't necessarily feel the need to add myself into that pile. But if I really wanted to like engage with these individuals who felt this way, who took up these actions, like there needed to be a different approach, a different response to the ways that they've chosen to, you know, rebel, the ways that they've chosen to reject what happened. And so I think I want to extend as much grace as I can to these individuals who, of course, are upset. But at the same time, I'm so frustrated with the system and the ways in which it clearly continues to perpetuate these imbalances, injustice. Like these people are, yes, they're being arrested, they're being, you know, taken in, they'll serve their time, they'll pay their fines. But man, if a Black Lives Matter movement like rushed the hill like that, like there'd be bodies everywhere, you know, and that's what hurts, is we know that, and we see that, we've seen it in, you know, even just the protests. Like so many times I was like, where are your rubber bullets? Where are, you know, where are all these other tactics that you've used, knowing that people were going to be peacefully protesting? But then I have to heart check myself and be like, okay, is that really the most constructive way to move forward? So yeah, that was really difficult to watch and to not be in a place of judgment. And so yeah, I think a lot of those emotions are still being processed.
I was reading, because I was asking the same questions as y'all about like, where are all the forces that were there during the Black Lives Matter protests? And I read something interesting. I think it was in Washington Post, but they were trying to do some like investigation and making sense. And there's one article was talking about how Trump actually the night before gave his like okay, and even said like get 10,000 of your National Guard ready, and so he gave the okay, which people later lied about. But it was actually the DC mayor, Muriel Bowser, who said, actually in response to what Trump did to get that photo op at that church, pulling all the guards in there. And then, you know, a lot of the police, you know, people looked at police so poorly, right, for a long time. And still, we're still dealing with that, but wanting to not just automatically bring in law enforcement. So it was that sort of reaction to how police had been misused and abusing their power that they actually decided not to bring in the troops until way later. So that was really kind of interesting to see. It was like, you can't really blame the DC mayor for their decision either, because they have context from where they're coming from and trying to do the right thing. But at the same time, you're like, oh my God, this could have been averted so differently. Yeah. That was a lot to be like, wow, politics is so complicated, you know, for leaders to know what is the right thing to do, because the context is always changing. Yeah, that was
we
a
don't
lot.
always get the full picture either.
No, yeah, absolutely. You know, George, when you're talking about having like wanting to, especially as we're both like therapists, trying to extend compassion and grace, you know, and even empathy to the people who broke into the Capitol. I'll just be really transparent, and like that kind of behavior happened at least once a month at my home, right? Glass broken, doors smashed in, So that angry, violent, aggressive behavior to me is nothing new. Very triggering because I grew up with it. But I've in my own adult life started to see like, that's what I witnessed. So I also experienced that internally, right? And I've had one or two moments where I'm like, I should call the cops on myself. I'm so not okay right now. So I think what hurt when I was looking at the videos of people screaming and yelling was like, I could feel both sides of the door, I could feel, and maybe because I'm an empath too, what the Capitol Police must have been feeling, especially watching the video of Eugene Goodman. Oh my God, that man's a saint and so brave. But when I saw the angry, and not all white, there were like Asian, Latino, and Black people in that crowd. I was like, what the hell's happening right now? So ashamed to see the Asian face. Like, no. But when I saw the screaming faces and the people wearing the Confederate flag and the QAnon shirts, I had this weird experience of being like, that could have been me had I grown up like them, And I can almost imagine the kind of rage and fear that was coming along with all the violence. There's a lot of fear and shame underneath it all. And earlier, I don't know if DJ, you mentioned it, a lot of times we try and cover our shame with pride. And, when we look at all these like white supremacists, there's a lot of arrogance and pride about I'm right, I'm better than you. But I feel like underneath a lot of that is so much shame. But then people can only endure shame so long. I feel like there's just a point where if shame goes unaddressed, you either feel like dying or you feel like killing. That's not how humans are built to be, right? So you either destroy yourself or you destroy everything around you. So there was a lot of that feeling of like, wow, like at one point, Americans just decided like, we're just going to start imploding and attacking ourselves. So,
Well, that's tweetable, and that's a great soundbite. So you just came onto something that is so powerful. That shame kills us or kills someone else. Yeah. Well, we have much to explore in season 5. Thank you for checking in on what's happening in our country, and we may revisit this further, but it's a developing story, as they say in journalism. And I want to thank our new audience that's joining us for new audience and returning audience joining us for season 5 of Erasing Shame. You've gotten to know our co-hosts over these first two episodes, and we look forward to having ongoing conversations about erasing shame this year. And we pray that you will stay healthy, wear your masks, and we'll check in with you again. Drop us a line on Facebook, YouTube, or our website, erasingshame.com. Thank you for listening, and have a great month. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Erasing Shame podcast. Check out our website at erasingshame.com. We would love to hear your comments and questions. Please subscribe on any podcast app like Apple, Google, Spotify, or on Facebook and YouTube. And please add a rating, a review, and a share so more people can experience the freedom and healing that comes from erasing shame.